In the 17th century, the French court is a theater of velvet and vigilance. Louis XIV, the young Sun King, gathers power to himself, first at the Louvre, then at Saint-Germain-en-Laye and Versailles, while the great families watch, bow, and whisper. His brother Philippe, Duke of Orleans, resides at St. Cloud with his brilliant English wife, Henrietta Anne Stuart, Madame, a princess born in exile, sister to Charles II of England. Between France and England runs a tense thread: religion and reputation, subsidies and sea power, siblings separated by water and war. England's crown rests on the Protestant settlement, yet its king shelters Catholic sympathies. France seeks friends against the Dutch and the Habsburgs. Both weigh alliances in rooms where a bell at dawn wakes not only valets, but history. The stakes are enormous: dynasty, church, empire, and into this net of duty steps a woman with a fan, a king with a pen, and a secret whose echo will ripple into another throne room. Morning at St. Cloud begins with the opening of shutters and the soft complaint of rope through pulleys. A bell rings twice. Linen is aired, a velvet coverlet smoothed. In the antechamber, the air is cool with the scent of wax and damp stone. A page, young, careful, balances a tray with folded notes and a narrow glass carafe. Light slides over a portrait, not French, but English. A dark-eyed queen whose varnish has begun to crack. Henrietta Maria, mother of Madame, who fled the axe that cut through England, as a story, and raised her children where French and English were learned like two versions of a prayer. Madame rises to ritual and restraint. A veil is pinned precisely. A ring, her mother's, turns once on her finger and comes to rest. The day's litany is read by the intendant. Visit from the abbess, fitting for the new gown embroidered with river reeds. A carriage to Saint-Germain for the king's collation. Private hour in the gallery to practice the lute. Behind these entries is another column of numbers written in a clerk's fine hand. For paper of thicker weight, for sealing wax of a darker red, for a cipher wheel of wood and ivory, never mentioned aloud, always charged to household repairs. She is 26, a wife, a mother, a sister to a king, and a woman alive to her own loneliness. Philippe, Monsieur, brother to the Sun King, is a splendid man. He sparkles with metals and silks, collects admirers like others collect rare shells. His affections burn bright and elsewhere. Their household is brilliant, petty, generous, calculating. Like all the courts of Europe, it runs on the small oil of favors and the large machinery of reputation. Louis XIV arrives at St. Cloud with a simplicity calculated to impress. He steps from his carriage with a gloved hand, removes the glove slowly. The gesture is studied, yet feels effortless. He greets his brother, embraces him. He speaks to Madame in French, polished in the mouth, a language he commands like the sun commands the day. They are family, and they are sovereigns. Everyone in the room knows those roles can both shelter and suffocate. There are other eyes, too. Madame de Montespan, the king's brilliant companion, whose fan hides a smile. Ministers with paper tucked into their sleeves. A priest who seems to listen for the soul but hears politics in every sigh. At table, the conversation is safe. A garden, a painter, a mare with perfect legs. But the talk that matters happens later, when the candles are fewer and the servants have been dismissed. In a small cabinet with a low ceiling and an English tapestry of a harbor, a sealed letter rests on the desk, wax unbroken, the Stuart arms pressed into the red. It smells faintly of salt and lamp oil. It is from a brother to a sister, from an island to a riverbank. It regards, without saying it outright, conversion and coin, the turning of a nation's face toward Rome, the closing of English ranks with France against Dutch sails. Madame reads with her hand flat on the table to steady herself. She is dutiful, she is clever, she is necessary. Louis watches her as a statesman watches the wind, not as command, but as condition. Between them is not a simple flame, it is a mirror and a veil. The world likes to make of men and women one story only. The world has not stood in this cabinet. has not felt what power demands from intimacy, and what intimacy demands from power. A key turns in the lock. The guard outside shifts his weight. Madame folds the letter and sets her fan atop it. Lilies and roses together, France and England painted upon a plain of silk. The king's eyes move to it, and something unspoken ripples between them. It is not yet a promise. It is the possibility of one. And in another palace, across water, a parliament sits like a patient river, serene, until the thaw. The anomalies begin as slight as dust on a velvet hem. A carriage from Saint-Germain is delayed by half an hour, and when it arrives, a clerk notes the upholstery smells of sea air. A late note, folded twice over and sealed with wax nearly black, is tucked beneath a prayer book. A glove is found on the window seat with a smear of red wax on the cuff, as if it had brushed a seal before it dried. An attendant, older, loyal to Madame since the days of English exile, watches the movements that seem idle, but now tilt at a pattern. 2 corridors are closed for repairs, though no carpenter appears. Carriages are swapped at a convent door, and at the mews of a noble whose debts the crown recently forgave. An evening collation is moved from a broad salon to a smaller room near a private staircase, just wide enough for 2 to pass shoulder to shoulder. At vespers, Madame attends in a dress the color of river stones. Her fan is painted with roses fainter than blush. She bows her head. In the pew behind, Madame de Montespan flexes her fan with precision, shading eyes that see everything. She sees the extra ring of keys at the waist of Madame's English maid. She sees a folded map pinned inside the lining of a traveling cape. It is not jealousy only. It is survival in a place where proximity is a currency, and sovereignty itself unsure how to separate love from influence. The king's minister, Henri de Lyon, receives a line in a cipher he knows is English, then watches his own hand write the reply in French. Lyon is a man too old for illusions, too young to be tired of power. He understands that the softest voice in this exchange is also the most dangerous. In his ledger, he writes modest sums for candles for the gallery and straw for the stables. In the margins, where no one will look, he writes a single date with a circle around it: Dover. Monsieur frowns at the board set for cards and rearranges the cushions. His tastes are public. His wounds go unspoken. A favorite sent away by the king's command, exiled for causing dissension, has left a cold in the rooms where laughter once hard. The favorite's letters return like tidewater, their language careful, their bitterness disguised as delicacy. Monsieur swallows hurt in candied violets, declines to dine, and orders fireworks for the feast of St. John. He will be seen. The room will be lit. The sky will open like a fan. Servants gather rumors as if they were dry wood for winter. A footman says the king and Madame once walked alone in the bois, no attendants. A laundress says she found a linen shirt damp with perfume in a basket where it should not be. A clerk in the wardrobe says he has begun to count the fans. 2 of silk, 1 of lace, and now a new one painted with a harbor dotted with ships. A southerly wind, tiny on canvas, blowing toward a cliff of chalk. The whisper that takes shape is double-edged. Is it an affair of the heart, or an affair of states? Courtiers parry with declarations. They are siblings by law, says one. Their affection is familial, their closeness a necessity. No, counters another, voice lowered. The glances are too long, the turn of the head too careful, the fan a shield where there is a cover. In truth, nobody knows. In truth, the body politic is quick to project its desires onto 2 faces. It watches with a hunger it will not name. At the Louvre, a painter presents Madame with a small portrait. Her face in 3/4, hair parted, eyes steady. She smiles and thanks him. When she is alone, she wraps the portrait in linen and tucks it into a chest. On top, she lays a folded paper heavy with seal. Her fingers rest on the wax as if to take its warmth and give it back. She thinks of her brother's laugh, of a fleet in gray water, of the soft summer grass where she and a king had once, eyes bright, spoken of things that were never meant to be written. If you're drawn into this world of gloved hands and sealed letters, subscribe and ring the bell. The night that fixes their fate is at the threshold. Stay with me for the moment the seal is pressed and the door will not open again. The sea at Calais is a mirror 1 minute and a fist the next. A small French vessel, stripped of markings and crewed by men who ask no questions, leaves in the dark of early morning. In the cabin, a trunk bound in leather. In the trunk, a white fan. Beneath the fan, paper that weighs more than any metal. Madame sits with her hands folded in her lap, feeling the vessel's breath, the way a human chest breathes between sleep and waking. On the quay, a clerk in a plain coat writes a ledger entry for flour, straw, salt meat. He does not write Princess of England, sister to a king, envoy to a secret. At Dover, a harbor lantern swings in the wind. Henry Bennet, Lord Arlington, Charles II's minister, meets her with a bow that is both courtly and grateful. The King of England comes through a side door, the sort of door only used when the state must pretend not to be itself. Brother and sister hold each other so tightly for a moment that the room forgets to breathe. Then the work begins, in a small chamber where the paint peels and the chair legs wobble. The treaty is twofold. The public face smiles, alliance against the Dutch, a naval partnership dressed in decent cloth. The private secret face is something else. A conversion whispered against wood and flame, a promise of coin from France to England, a folding of the island's future into the brocade of a Catholic king's private chapel. Whether Charles means to keep this promise in his lifetime, whether he means it as tactic or truth, remains his own locked drawer. Madame's task is to carry the keys. A seal is warmed over a quiet flame. Wax drips in a red bead that shines before it dulls. A signet ring, the same engraved stamp that has pressed victories and pardons, descends and stamps silence into the pool. On the table are 4 rings, one from France, one from England, one from a man's office, one from a woman's love. It could be read 100 ways. The ink dries. The letters fold. The harbor wind changes. Back in France, the king receives her in a small antechamber at St. Cloud. Shutters drawn against a summer afternoon. No trumpets. No caller to announce her name. Just a latch lifted without flourish, and the gravity of 2 people who have crossed a threshold. The conversation is swift, rounded by long pauses. She tells him the vows were spoken. He listens with his head bent, like a penitent without a priest. He takes the paper wrapped around the paper, the outer cover as innocent as a hymn, the inside as heavy as iron. They do not touch. This is not their language, not here, not now. He closes the cabinet with a key. She closes her fan. Silence gathers like a velvet curtain. A bell rings for the evening, and they both startle, as if they had been dreaming. That night, St. Cloud is a lantern. The ball is an advertisement of calm, a court dancing while history unstitches itself in the next room. Montespan beams, her jewels a night sky of their own. Monsieur wears violet with silver and smiles too much. The musicians play a sarabande. Feet slide and lift, as if to move without disturbing the ground. Madame dances once, twice, then pleads a headache and withdraws. In the small room reserved for her, a bed with light hangings, a table with 2 candles, she accepts what a maid calls a comforting draught, a domestic remedy brought before, a sip taken, a sigh escaping. The maid feels the weight of the cup, and later will wonder if it was heavier by a hair, if the smell was different by a breath. A mistake almost exposes everything. On the table lies, half covered by a handkerchief, the spare Stuart seal. Only Madame's old attendant sees it. With the terror of a soldier catching a falling banner, she slides it beneath the letters with a sweep of her palm and blows out 1 candle. Shadows absolve what carelessness revealed. Not long after midnight, a quiet becomes too quiet. The maid returns with fresh linen. Madame sits with her hand to her belly, her face so white the candlelight seems ruddy by comparison. A chair is moved. The doctor is sent for. He comes barefoot, shoes in hand, robe thrown over. In the hallway, the sound of the king's footfall is unmistakable, and the king does not run. He walks with terrible speed. An antechamber fills with silence, heavy as lead. Words fall like cards. "Colic," says one voice. "A chill caught on the water," says another. "A fever from the nerves," whispers a third. And somewhere, because there must be, the word poison is whispered and ignored and whispered again, with the first syllable like an oath. It is not a word that contains instruction. It is a word that opens a wound. By morning, the palace breathes in measured gasps. The king's guard stands like statues down the corridor. The confessor arrives, passing beneath a painting of a marriage where no one looks happy. The doors open and close, quietly. The doctor's table is covered with folded towels and instruments that glint in the half-light. Their names not spoken here. A priest's corridor becomes the busiest artery of the house. Monsieur enters with eyes like glass. He kneels by the bed, takes his wife's hand, and speaks in a voice that sounds borrowed from a younger man he once was. Madame murmurs. No one can tell whether she speaks to her husband, her brother, or some memory even nearer. When the pain flares, she bites her lip. When it recedes, she closes her eyes. A mirror is held briefly before the mouth. Its surface fogs and clears, fogs and clears. The bell tolls for morning prayer. The whole house hallows her breath. The inquiry begins before she is lost. A physician recounts the hours with careful vagueness. How the pain rose and fell, how the skin became cool, how the heartbeat stuttered like a bird against glass. He will later write a statement full of learned words that say essentially, "It is complicated," and he is right. A noblewoman recalls a draught that smelled of bitter herbs and resins. An usher saw a man he did not know slip along the wall after midnight. A servant remembers the cup. Everyone wants to be helpful. Everyone is afraid. Rumor, which had been a moon, turns sun and burns the dew. The Chevalier de Lorraine, Monsieur's banished favorite, is named in whispers as the hand behind an act that is never described plainly. An oil, perhaps, someone says. A cloth with a treatment, says another. Nothing, says the doctor. Nothing but the body's own storm. The word jealousy is deployed like a pike. The word revenge like a pistol returned to its case. No proof emerges. The ledger shows no purchase that could kindle a trial. There is only timing, and the human appetite for explanations that fit their moral order. The king orders an examination after death, a decision made hastily, grimly, almost with tenderness. The tenderness of a man who must fire a gun to put a horse out of its agony. The reports disagree even in their neatness. One says that the stomach was unremarkable. Another records discolorations. A third notes nothing that any courtroom could grasp, only phrases that feel like smoke. Later, Madame de Sévigné will write to a friend, describing a horror so complete that the details melt into one pain. Her letter survives, but like all such letters, it is a window with warped glass. In a small parlor with blue walls, a confrontation takes place without voices raised. Monsieur faces the king, words measured as if the syllables were counted out like coins. "You took from me," he says without saying it. "I gave to you," the king replies without speaking. They stand weighed down by two versions of the same loss and two versions of the same accusation. They are bound to each other by blood, and to the world by the sight of them standing together, unbroken. That necessity carries them across a chasm where grief would happily swallow both. The ministers convene. Leon opens his ledger, his fingertips stained with ink. The subsidy must continue. The English alliance must be managed. The secret part of the treaty is now a hotter coal. A courier waits for instructions. His horse stamps in the yard, leaving small crescents in the dirt. The paper with the seal, where is it? In the cabinet where the king left it, locked? Or did Madame's old attendant, in the chaos, move it to a safer place? The question is asked once, gently. The answer is a nod toward a drawer, and a soft word. Safe. At the funeral, Bossuet ascends the pulpit and delivers an oration that makes kings weep and queens tremble. He speaks of vanity and dust, of lilies that bloom and are cut, of the shimmering emptiness of the world without God. He does not speak of Dover or seals or cups. He does not speak of jealousy. His words coat the room like balm and like frost. In England, the treaty's public articles open into the light like flowers. The private articles are known in a handful of chests and a dozen heads, and rumors begin their patient work. Why is the king so flush? Why does his foreign policy bend toward France? Why does he smile at Catholics with a smile he saves for no one else? Why is his sister dead in a foreign bed? The answers, when constructed, will spend years becoming a net, and one day, in another reign, they will draw tight. Montespan watches the rebalancing of attention like a general reading a map. She is blamed by no one for this tragedy. She blames herself for nothing. She perceives the space where sorrow has made the king quiet, and moves toward it with a soft step. Madame de Maintenon, governess to the king's legitimized sons, wraps a shawl around a child, and sees in grief a door she will one day be asked to open or close. The palace is a living thing. It shifts its weight and goes on. Years turn. The ink of the secret articles has dried and cracked. The alliance with France draws England into a war against the Dutch that the sea seems to disapprove of. Storms, lost ships, a ledger that will not balance. Parliament bristles at French coin and French council. The stop of the exchequer shocks the moneyed classes. The popish plot fantasizes enemy priests in every cupboard. Justice, once a scale, becomes a weather vane during the frenzy. Heads fall not because evidence stands, but because fear stands taller. The exclusion crisis opens, and does not close. Who will inherit if the king dies? A Catholic brother, James, Duke of York, who married first an English noblewoman, and then a young Italian princess, bringing the old church closer to the English throne than the city can bear. The people hold torches and cry. The court lights candles and prays. The king balances, all charm and plots and dogs at his feet. And in another house across the channel, a French king opens a cabinet and looks at a sealed paper he has not reread in years. The wax is dull. The seal impression is smooth from being turned absent-mindedly beneath a thumb. In 1685, the English king dies, and his brother becomes James II, a king who wears his conscience like armor and seems compelled to test it for dents. He baptizes a son into the Catholic faith. The boy's cry at the font reverberates to the street like a trumpet. The story that has been knitting itself since Dover, since a fan closed over a seal, since funds passed quietly from one sovereign to another, tightens its stitches. This is not just religion now. It is the personal, the familial, the fear of a future drawn in a hand not approved by the commons. In 1688, a fleet sails not from France but from the Dutch Republic. William of Orange lands, invited by men whose hands shake when they sign, and who will later say the pen was heavy. James looks to France and finds shelter. He flees with his queen and their child, the carriage rocking like a cradle on roads he had thought he owned. They cross the water. Louis XIV receives them at Saint-Germain-en-Laye, in rooms where once a young woman had read a letter carefully, and a man had nodded with a face that did not betray what it felt like to carry a world. Exile is not a punishment only. It is a vocation of remembering. James walks the terraces of Saint-Germain in a brown coat and thinks of oaken panels and English rain. Mary of Modena kneels in a chapel where the candles smell like beeswax and thinks of a baby-ass fingers closing and opening like lilies. A courier arrives with a letter from Ireland, another from Rome, another from a cousin who writes with sympathy and distance. The French king is generous and also calculating. He offers money, rooms, a chapel, and the cold comfort of a court that does not bow to foreign kings with quite the old enthusiasm. Thus a dynasty falls, not with a shout, though shouts attended it, but with the slow withdrawal of consent in a nation that had, long before, watched a king die and discovered it could survive. Do we place the weight of the fall on a sealed paper in a Dover chamber? No. A state is heavier than any one letter. But we would be blind not to see a thread drawn there, taut and careful, carried by a woman who moved through a world that could not decide whether she was instrument or player. The ring she wore has been smoothed by worry. The fan she carried once now lies in a drawer. The key that turned the cabinet has made a small round scar in her attendant's palm from being held too tightly. Decades later, during workmen's repairs after one war and before another, a floorboard at St. Cloud lifts. In the dust, half pressed into the packed earth beneath, a small ring is found. Gold thin as a whisper, set with a dull ruby. It could be any lady's ring. A servant keeps it in a handkerchief for 2 days, and then takes it to the steward, who logs it in a ledger with a note plain as bread. Found in the East Cabinet Room, origin unknown. That ledger survives, the ring does not. In an auction in Paris, long after both kings are dead, a small portrait changes hands. A woman in 3/4, hair parted, eyes steady. The back of the panel bears a faint inscription in English, almost erased by time. A collector argues with a historian about the sitter's identity. The historian squints and shrugs. The collector smiles and bids. Legend attaches itself to objects that seem to demand a story. Records attach themselves to people who left too many. Among the papers rescued from Saint-Germain in a hurried night before soldiers came to requisition horses and beds, there is folded letter with softened wax. The seal, once precise, has been rubbed by a thumb. The letter itself is harmless, a request for a herbal infusion, careful instructions in a neat feminine hand, a mention of a fan left on a chair. In the margin, a penciled note in another hand, "Keep this." Why? No one writes why. Historians dispute much of this, as they should. They argue about the degree to which the secret treaty mattered, about the nature of the affection between a sister-in-law and a king, about whether a favorite exiled could reach into a bedchamber with a cup handed to a maid. They compare diaries, the letter of Madame de Sévigné gilded with sensibility, the later memoirs of Saint Simon bristling with malice and aperçu, the numbers in Lyon's ledger that speak a language drier and more damning. Legend and record not often marry, and when they do, the marriage is full of polite lies. What remains is a still room where power and tenderness once met. A bed canopy gathered up and tied with ribbon, a cabinet with a key that slides home with a whisper. What survives is the sense that sovereignty requires affection and often cannibalizes it. In a sunlit gallery, there is a portrait with a crack in its varnish that runs from eyebrow to jaw, as if time had smiled too wide. In a parish register, a name once copied in large, fair hand has been erased and written again smaller. And in the end, what we hold is an image, a seal pressed into wax by a hand that had to sign for everyone, and after it, very quietly, the wax seal cooling in the dark.